I thought I knew how to drive. I really did. I honestly thought that because I had survived the bumper to bumper chaos of the 405 in Los Angeles, and because I could navigate a 5-lane Texas highway while drinking an iced coffee, I was essentially a professional driver. I thought driving was just a universal human experience that translated perfectly across borders. But then, about a year and a half ago, I moved from the United States to the United Kingdom, and I was literally shocked. I am telling you right now, everything we think we know about roads, cars, and getting from point A to point B in America is not only completely different from how they do it in Europe, but in many ways, the American way is actually entirely backward. Let's not even start with the obvious stuff like driving on the left. Yes, that is terrifying for the first 2 weeks. Your brain feels like it's melting out of your ears, but you get over it. What you do not get over, what continually baffles me every single day as an American expat living in the UK, is the absolute dominance of the roundabout. We need to start here because this is the perfect metaphor for everything. In the US, we are absolutely terrified of roundabouts. We treat them like they are alien crop circles that have been mysteriously dropped into our intersections. If an American town proposes building a roundabout, the local Facebook groups literally lose their minds. People will show up to town hall meetings crying, saying it's going to cause mass casualties. But here in the UK, they are everywhere, and I mean everywhere. You will be driving down a completely normal straight road, and suddenly there is a painted white circle on the ground the size of a dinner plate, and that is a mini roundabout, and everyone just magically knows exactly whose turn it is to go. I had to look into why this is because the difference in mentality is staggering. Historically, the US actually tried roundabouts back in the early 1900s. They called them traffic circles, like Columbus Circle in New York, but they were chaotic because the rule was that the cars entering the circle had the right of way. So naturally, the circles just filled up with cars until nobody could move, and it was gridlock. So America essentially threw their hands up, said this is a terrible idea, and handed the entire country over to the traffic light lobbying groups. Yes, there was a literal lobby for traffic lights, heavily backed by the automotive and electrical industries, who realized they could sell massive, expensive infrastructure to cities. But over here in the UK in the 1960s, a genius at the Transport Research Laboratory named Frank Blackmore figured out the missing piece. He established the give way to the right rule. Suddenly, the traffic inside the circle had the right of way, meaning the circle constantly cleared itself out. The UK adopted this nationwide, and the statistics on this are wild. Did you know that converting a standard 4-way traffic light intersection into a roundabout reduces severe injury and fatal collisions by nearly 90%? 90%. In the US, we are literally dying at intersections because someone tries to run a red light at 60 miles an hour and T-bones a minivan. Here, because a roundabout forces you to physically slow down and change the angle of your car, even if you do crash, it's a low-speed sideswipe. No one dies. The psychological brilliance of the roundabout is that it forces the driver to take responsibility. A traffic light tells an American driver, green means go, turn off your brain, press the gas, you have the right of way. A roundabout tells a British driver, you need to look, you need to judge the speed of others, you need to make eye contact, you are part of a community right now. It is a completely different way of viewing your fellow citizens. But speaking of fellow citizens, let's totally switch gears and talk about pedestrians. Because this is the thing that makes me the most emotional. In the US, we would never ever step into the street outside of a designated crosswalk when the little white walking man is illuminated. If you do that in America, you are committing a crime. It is called jaywalking, and you can and will be ticketed, fined, or even arrested for it by a cop hiding behind a billboard. When I first moved to the UK, I was standing on the pavement, which is what they call the sidewalk here. Another thing to get used to, and I was waiting for a break in the traffic to cross. A British friend was with me, and they just stepped right out into the road. I physically grabbed their coat. I thought they were going to die, or at least get a massive citation. And they just looked at me like I was insane. Here is what I learned that absolutely blew my mind. Jaywalking does not exist here. It is not a legal concept in the UK. Pedestrians have a fundamental historical right to use the road. The road belongs to the people, not just the machines. In America, we have been completely brainwashed. I mean that literally. If you look at the historical context, in the 1920s in America, cars were new and they were slaughtering people in cities. Before cars, American streets were chaotic. beautiful places filled with streetcars, horses, children playing, and people selling things. The streets belonged to everyone. When cars arrived, they were rich people's toys, and they started killing pedestrians at an alarming rate. The American public was outraged. There was a massive movement to put strict speed governors on all cars, legally capping them at 25 miles per hour. The auto industry? Ford, General Motors, panicked. They realized that if cars couldn't go fast, no one would buy them. So they executed one of the most successful PR campaigns in human history. They decided they needed to shift the blame from the driver to the pedestrian. They invented the term jaywalker. Back then, a jay was a slur for a clueless country bumpkin. So a jaywalker was an idiot who didn't know how to walk in a modern city. The car companies literally paid for Boy Scouts to hand out cards on the street, shaming people for walking in the road. They hosted public parades where they would mock arrest clowns pretending to be jaywalkers. They completely rewrote the legal structure of the American city to make the road the exclusive property of the automobile, and they made the human being a trespasser in their own neighborhood. I was literally shocked when I realized this. I felt so betrayed by my own country's history. Over here in Europe, and specifically in the UK, that auto industry takeover never quite happened to the same extreme. Sure, they love their cars, but the psychological hierarchy is different. Just recently, the UK updated their highway code to explicitly state a hierarchy of road users. The people who can cause the greatest harm, those driving trucks and cars, have the greatest responsibility to reduce the danger they pose to others. Pedestrians are at the very top of the hierarchy. If a pedestrian is waiting to cross at a junction, the car turning into that junction legally must stop and let them cross. In the US, the car is king. The car is the apex predator, and if you are on foot, you are essentially treated as a second-class citizen who couldn't afford a Ford F-150. Which brings me to the actual design of the roads themselves. We need to talk about the concept of the stroad. If you don't know what a stroad is, it is a term coined by an American civil engineer named Chuck Marohn, and it perfectly describes everything that is wrong with the United States. A stroad is supposed to be a complex environment where humans interact, businesses operate, and wealth is created. Think of a classic European high street or a historic downtown. The speed limit is low, the sidewalks are wide. A road, on the other hand, is a high-speed connection between two places. Think of a highway or a motorway. Its only job is to move cars quickly. In America, we have combined the two into a Frankenstein monster called a stroud. This is your classic American suburban landscape. It's a road with 5 or 6 lanes of high-speed traffic, but it's lined with drive-thrus, big box stores, gas stations, and massive parking lots. You have cars trying to go 50 miles an hour, while other cars are slamming on their brakes to turn right into a Taco Bell. It is the deadliest, ugliest, most financially inefficient type of infrastructure ever invented, and America is paved with them. When I moved here, I noticed something immediately. The UK doesn't really have stroads. They have motorways, which are highly efficient, high-speed roads with no businesses attached to them. And they have high streets, which are slow, pedestrian-focused areas where the shops are. There is a clear boundary. The psychological relief of not having to navigate an American stroad cannot be overstated. When I go to my local supermarket here, I literally walk. I take a little canvas tote bag, I walk 10 minutes down a quiet residential lane, I buy my groceries, and I walk home. In the US, even if the grocery store was geographically close, I would have to get in my car, cross a massive stroad, risk my life making an unprotected left turn across 3 lanes of traffic, navigate a sea of parking spaces, and then drive back. And let's talk about those parking spaces, because this is where the cultural nuances really start to show. American parking lots are vast, empty oceans of asphalt. Our zoning laws, specifically a legal framework called Euclidean zoning, which separates residential from commercial zones, mandate minimum parking requirements. A restaurant in the US legally has to provide a certain number of parking spots, even if they never get used. This spreads our cities out so far that you are forced to drive. Over here, space is at an absolute premium. The UK is a small island with centuries-old infrastructure. The concept of paving over a massive plot of land in the middle of a town just so cars can sit empty is viewed as absolute madness. When you do have to park here, it is a humbling experience. The spaces are tiny, microscopically small. You have to essentially grease up your sides to slide out of your door. And this brings up the most glaring difference of all, the cars themselves. When Americans come to Europe, they always laugh at the tiny little hatchbacks. We see these little Fiat 500S and Vauxhall Corsas, and our American brains, which have been conditioned to believe that bigger equals safer, think, oh, look at that cute little toy car. But here is the reality check. Those giant American pickup trucks, the ones with the front grills that are literally 5 feet tall, they are killing people. The psychological analysis of American car buying habits is actually deeply depressing. In the US, our roads feel chaotic and dangerous because of the stroads and the speed and the terrible intersection design. So Americans engage in an arms race. We buy massive SUVs and trucks because we want to feel safe inside a fortress. But because everyone is driving a fortress, the visibility is terrible, the stopping distance is increased, and if you happen to hit a pedestrian or a cyclist, the height of the hood ensures you hit them directly in the vital organs instead of the legs. Over here, the roads are narrower. When a British driver is on a narrow country lane enclosed by ancient stone walls or towering hedgerows, they feel a sense of claustrophobia. This triggers a psychological phenomenon called risk homeostasis. Because the environment feels dangerous, the driver instinctively slows down and pays hyperattention. Because American roads are incredibly wide, straight, and flat, the driver feels perfectly safe. So they speed, they check their phones, they zone out. Wide roads actually cause more accidents because they induce driver complacency. I was shocked to learn that despite having narrower, older, and twistier roads, the UK has one of the lowest road fatality rates in the entire world. The US fatality rate is astronomically higher. We are sacrificing thousands of lives every year for the illusion of convenience and the right to drive a literal tank to go buy a frappuccino. But I can hear my American friends right now saying, okay, Olivia, but what about the actual driving? Isn't it a nightmare over there? Well, let me just tell you about the process of legally being allowed to drive, because this is a massive piece of the puzzle. We need to talk about the driving test. In America, depending on the state, getting a driver's license is terrifyingly easy. I got my license in the US when I was 16. I took a very brief, multiple-choice written test that asked questions like, what does a red octagon mean? Then I got into a car with a DMV evaluator named Gary, who looked like he just wanted to go to lunch. I drove around a quiet residential block, parked next to a curb. I didn't even have to parallel park, and Gary handed me a piece of paper that allowed me to operate a multi-ton death machine for the rest of my natural life. When I realized I had to get a UK driver's license because my American one was only valid for a year, I thought it would be a breeze. I had been driving for years. I was so arrogant. I am here to tell you, the UK driving test is one of the most rigorous, stressful, and humiliating academic and physical gauntlets a human being can endure. First of all, the theory test is not a joke. You have to memorize massive amounts of the highway code, including specific stopping distances in wet versus dry weather at exact speeds. And then there is the hazard perception test. You sit at a computer and watch point-of-view videos of driving down British roads. You have to click the mouse the exact millisecond a developing hazard appears. A pedestrian looking like they might step out, a cyclist swerving, a tractor pulling out of a blind driveway. If you click too early, you fail. If you click too late, you fail. It trains your brain to constantly scan the environment for danger. And the practical driving test? It is brutal. It lasts for 40 minutes to an hour. The examiner doesn't just check if you can steer, they check if you check your mirrors. In fact, if you don't noticeably move your head to check your mirrors before you brake, you get a fault. You are expected to demonstrate eco-safe driving, meaning you use the gears efficiently to save fuel. You have to perform complex maneuvers like reversing into a parking bay or parallel parking on a busy road. And the pass rate, it's hovering around 45%. More than half the people who take the test fail. In some test centers, the pass rate is in the 30s. At first, my American brain was furious. I thought it was just a bureaucratic cash grab. But then I realized the truth. The reason European roads are safer, the reason they can have incredibly fast stretches of road like the Autobahn in Germany or the 70 miles per hour motorways here in the UK without mass carnage is because the barrier to entry is so high. Driving is not viewed as a fundamental constitutional right here. It is a highly regulated privilege. In the US, because our infrastructure forces everyone to drive to survive, the government essentially has to give a license to everyone with a pulse, regardless of their actual skill level. Because if you can't drive in America, you can't work, you can't eat, you can't live. By making the test easy, we accept that a certain number of terrible, dangerous drivers will be on the road. Here, the strictness of the test ensures a baseline of competence that makes everyone safer. Okay, let's totally jump subjects for a second and look down at the road surface itself, because even the asphalt is culturally different. Let's talk about lines, paint, and seeing in the dark. In the US, if you are driving on a highway at night and it starts pouring down rain, what happens? The painted white and yellow lines on the road completely disappear. They vanish into the shiny black void, and you are basically playing a high-stakes guessing game, following the taillights of the car in front of you and praying they know where the lanes are. It is deeply stressful. When I first drove at night in the rain in the UK, I was bracing myself for that familiar panic, but instead the road lit up like a runway. I am talking about cat's eyes. If you don't know what these are, they are reflective road studs embedded right into the center of the road. They were invented by a British man named Percy Shaw back in 1934. The story goes that he was driving down a foggy, dangerous road in Yorkshire, and he saw the reflection of his headlights in the eyes of a cat sitting on a fence, which saved him from driving off a cliff. He took that concept and invented a rubber and glass stud that is actually self-cleaning. Every time a car tire drives over the rubber dome, it pushes the glass reflectors down into a pool of rainwater that collects at the base, wiping them clean. It is one of the most brilliant, simple pieces of engineering I have ever seen. In the UK, these studs are color-coded. White studs separate the lanes. Red studs mark the left edge of the motorway. Amber studs mark the central reservation, or the median. Green studs show you where the slip roads or off-ramps are. Even in the blackest night, in the worst torrential British rainstorm, you can see the shape of the road for miles ahead. It is incredibly calming. Why doesn't America use these everywhere? Well, part of it is snowplows in the northern US states. Snowplows would rip them up, though there are recessed versions now. But the real reason is cost and funding structures. This brings us to a massive legal and structural difference: how we pay for our roads. In the US, roads are primarily funded by the federal gas tax. But here's the catch: the federal gas tax hasn't been raised since 1993. It is completely decoupled from inflation. Our highway trust fund is perpetually broke. We are trying to maintain the most colossal, sprawling road network in human history on a budget that makes zero mathematical sense. This is why American roads are notoriously full of massive, tire-destroying potholes and why bridges are literally collapsing. We build out these massive suburban stroads. The developers pay for the initial construction, but 20 years later, when the pipes burst and the asphalt crumbles, the local municipality doesn't have the tax base to fix it. It is a Ponzi scheme of infrastructure. In the UK, the funding model is very different. Fuel taxes here are incredibly high. A massive percentage of what you pay at the petrol station goes directly to the government. On top of that, drivers have to pay vehicle excise duty, commonly known as road tax, which is scaled based on how much pollution your car emits. If you drive a massive gas-guzzling SUV, you pay a fortune. If you drive a small electric or efficient car, you pay very little or nothing. This creates a massive financial incentive to drive smaller, less destructive vehicles. And yes, the British constantly complain about potholes. It is a national pastime here to complain about the state of the roads, but compared to the apocalyptic craters I used to dodge in places like Michigan or Pennsylvania, the roads here are generally well kept. The taxation system directly shapes the consumer behavior, which in turn shapes the physical landscape. And speaking of shaping behavior, we absolutely have to talk about speed cameras. This is a massive counter-argument I hear from my American family. They come over here or they read about Europe and they say, oh, it's a nanny state. They have cameras everywhere. Big Brother is watching you drive. And yes, it is true. There are speed cameras everywhere in the UK, but we need to analyze the psychology and the legal reality of this, because I actually vastly prefer the British system, and I'll tell you why. In America, speed enforcement is a game of hide and seek. The speed limits on our highways are often artificially low. A road might be engineered to feel perfectly safe at 75 miles per hour, but the posted limit is 55, so everyone drives 75. Then, a police officer hides behind a bridge abutment or sits in the dark with their lights off, armed with a radar gun. They pull you over, give you a $200 ticket, and it feels entirely arbitrary. It feels like taxation by citation. It doesn't actually slow traffic down long term. It just creates a hostile, antagonistic relationship between the public and the police. The police are being used as revenue generators for the local county court system. Here in the UK, the approach to speed cameras is overwhelmingly transparent. By law, fixed speed cameras must be painted bright, fluorescent yellow. There are signs warning you a mile in advance, half a mile in advance, saying speed cameras ahead. The goal is not to trick you into paying a fine. The goal is actually to slow you down in a dangerous area. If the government knows a specific stretch of road has a high crash rate, they put a bright yellow box there so that everyone physically takes their foot off the gas. It is a deterrent, not a trap. Furthermore, the UK uses average speed cameras over long stretches of motorway, especially during construction. Instead of measuring your speed at one specific point, cameras read your license plate at point A and then again 10 miles later at point B. If your average time between those points means you must have been going over the limit, you get a ticket in the mail. No cops hiding in the bushes, no dangerous traffic stops on the side of the motorway. It is purely objective. When you drive through an average speed check zone in the UK, an incredible thing happens. Every single car on the road drops to exactly 50 miles per hour. Everyone drives in perfect synchronized harmony. There is no tailgating, no aggressive swerving, because everyone knows they can't beat the math. In America, we would scream about our freedoms being infringed upon. But let me tell you, as a driver, the sheer lack of anxiety in knowing that no one is going to fly up behind you at 90 miles an hour flashing their high beams is pure bliss. It's a societal trade-off. You trade the freedom to break the law recklessly for the freedom of a stress-free, predictable commute. Let's shuffle back to the design of intersections because I just remembered another absolute shocker, turning on red. In the US, the right on red rule is practically a constitutional right. You pull up to a red light, you look left, and if it's clear, you just go, it keeps traffic flowing, right? We love it. Well, in the 1970s, during the oil crisis, the US federal government essentially mandated right on red nationwide to save fuel from idling cars. But here is the dark side of that policy that we never talk about. Right on red is an absolute disaster for pedestrians and cyclists. When an American driver is turning right on red, they are only looking to their left for a gap in the traffic. They are entirely oblivious to the pedestrian stepping off the curb on their right. Thousands of people are injured or killed because of this exact scenario. In the UK and most of Europe, turning on a red light is strictly illegal unless there is a very specific filter arrow pointing out. A red light means stop, period. No exceptions. When I first got here, sitting at a completely empty intersection at 2 a.m. waiting for the light to turn green felt ridiculous. I was gripping the steering wheel, my American instincts screaming at me to just go, but then I started walking around the cities. I started realizing how incredibly safe I felt as a pedestrian crossing the street, knowing that cars were absolutely positively locked in place by that red light. There was no creeping forward, no revving engines, no rolling stops. It's a fundamental respect for the absolute authority of the signal, which translates into safety for the most vulnerable people on the street. And this all loops back to the broader cultural psychology. When I look at American roads now, I see a system built on extreme individualism. It is every man for himself. My giant car protects me. My speed is my choice. The road is a competitive arena where I am fighting to get to my destination, and everyone else is an obstacle in my way. The zoning laws isolate us, forcing us into our steel boxes just to buy a carton of milk. The stroads prioritize speed over community. But when I look at European and UK roads, I see a system built on collectivism and compromise. Yes, the taxes are higher. Yes, the fuel is wildly expensive. Yes, you have to parallel park a tiny car into a space the size of a shoebox. Yes, you have to yield to pedestrians and navigate 50 roundabouts and pass a driving test that feels like a PhD defense. But the result is a society where children can safely walk to school, where the air quality in town centres isn't completely toxic, where the horrific statistics of traffic fatalities are dramatically minimised. I am not saying the UK is a perfect utopia. I have been stuck in the absolute misery of traffic on the M25 motorway, which they jokingly call the world's biggest parking lot. I have hit potholes in the countryside that made my teeth rattle. But the underlying philosophy is what shocked me. American infrastructure treats human life as cheap and expendable in the pursuit of uninterrupted speed. We have accepted a daily death toll that would be considered a national emergency if it were caused by anything other than cars. European infrastructure, despite its quirks and its ancient, winding, narrow limitations, fundamentally values the human being outside of the car just as much as the one inside it. So, the next time you are sitting in gridlock on a massive American stroad, staring at an endless sea of brake lights and a strip mall, just know that it doesn't have to be that way. We chose to build it like this. And frankly, after living over here and experiencing the alternative, I don't think I can ever look at an American road the same way again. It is truly shocking.